Okay, this recording is for my Modern World Studies students in the 3.06 lesson, which is called Strife in China. Today is the 10th, so October 10th. It's a Tuesday, and you can see a lot of interesting things happened in history. I would say the 1971 one is pretty weird. London Bridge, which was built and it was in London, was disassembled and reassembled in Arizona, which you can still visit today. London Bridge, the original London Bridge, is in Arizona, which you can go see. So that's pretty interesting. This week, just a reminder, it's pretty straightforward. Checkpoints, one quiz on Thursday, nothing on Friday. That's a family day, so you will not have school that day. Um, we're going to talk about our goals, and this is about China, and it gets a little worse. It's sort of a collapse of the government, of the regime, and it's going to throw the entire country into chaos for about 20, 30 years. And then World War II starts. So really, China goes from a regime to chaos for almost 50 years, 40 some years. We're going to compare and contrast how things relate between China and Japan, which I've been doing a lot. We're going to talk about the Boxer Rebellion, which is a very odd event in history. And then we'll talk about Sun Yat sen, a pretty amazing figure in history. Um, so, what do we remember about Japan? If we were in live class, I would be asking you guys this, and hopefully in the chat be getting some amazing responses like usual. But since it's a recording, we'll just talk through this. Japan modernized and industrialized and created a modern army and military. I don't want to make it seem like Japan did the right thing and China did the wrong thing. Japan became very militaristic, and in a lot of ways, that culture led to World War II, which led to their ultimate demise because after World War II, Japan was, had to completely start again, had to rebuild. So, but Japan does respond to imperialism in a different way. All right. Both were isolated. Japan and China were isolated originally, and then they were forced to decide if they were going to become imperial or refuse to adopt Western ways. Japan ultimately does not modernize, but I hinted yesterday in class, and I'm going to mention this more and more today, that that's not universal. Some people in China did, I said Japan, I meant China. Some people in China did want to modernize and fought to modernize, including an emperor, but his attempts were thwarted. He wasn't able to do it. So, this is the Chinese Empire, the Qing dynasty, or Qing dynasty. I think I'm pronouncing it Qing, is how you say it. Dynasty in the 1800s. It's very big empire, as modern China is today. It's limited contact with foreigners. Foreign countries were able to use one port. And I keep using that word port, and I want you to know that's a place where ships pull up on the ocean to a port city. It could be like a city like Cincinnati's off of a river, or Cleveland is off of a river, or Toledo, or it's not a river, lake. Toledo's off of a lake. Buffalo is a port city, and they could trade there. That's what they're doing. So the Chinese allow one port to be open for trade. But of course, we know that the Opium Wars begin because Britain wants to be more involved in China and trade. And in the mid 1800s, after the Opium Wars are over and Britain and other countries are starting to establish their dominance in China, there is this self strengthening movement, which is this idea that we're going to become stronger and stronger from within. It doesn't really take off or go well. The dynasty, let's talk about the dynasty for a second, and this lady in particular, the Dowager Princess. Now, or the Empress Dowager. Sorry, I said that wrong. So the Manchu dynasty has been around since 1644. As I mentioned before, it is a foreign dynasty. The Manchu dynasty within China they're considered foreigners. They were descendants of the Genghis Khan and all those people. So they've been ruling, but they're never really embraced, I guess you'd say. But they've been the ruling dynasty for hundreds of years. Now, the Dowager becomes the ruler of China. How does that happen? Well, Her son is 5 when he becomes emperor, 5 years old. Clearly, some of you have young brothers and sisters. 5-year-olds cannot rule a country. So, in those instances, and this happens throughout history, an adult will take over while the kid is young. This case, it's the mom. So the dowager becomes the ruler of China, and she's going to rule for China for her son for about 13 years. At age 18, her son, unfortunately, gets smallpox. We think we don't. That was what they reported, and he dies. When I say that, well, I'm only saying it's what's reported because of what comes next, but we'll find out about that in a second. So her son dies at 18. What to do now? Well, she puts her 3-year-old nephew on the throne now, which, by the way, buys her more time to be leader. Women could not really become rulers of China officially, so she's got to put somebody on the throne. It's got to be a boy, nephew, 3-year-old. He'll be perfect to be the next ruler in waiting, I guess. So his name is the Emperor Ganju. I think I'm saying that right. I'm all my pronunciations of Chinese words. That's just a guess. We had an intern last year living with us from Taiwan. She spoke fluent Chinese. She'd tell me all the time like the pronunciation's off, or so she'd fix it. Now I always feel like everything I say is wrong with Chinese, but that makes sense. So she lives in amazing palaces. She does not really tend to her people as much, right? People are at risk of starvation, but she's living this luxurious lifestyle. This is not unique to queens and kings back in the day, and emperors and empresses. But she builds her navy. Now, after the Sino-Japanese War, which we talked about yesterday, when Japan beats China in a war, Gao Ju is now an adult. He's now over the age where he can take over himself, and he doesn't need the empress anymore. So he's going to try to take over and modernize. He wants to modernize, okay? But the Empress Dowager is not okay with losing power. She has a coup and takes power back from the emperor. Now you're wondering, how does that happen? Well, she's been in power a lot longer. She's probably got a lot more connections and knows how to handle, things like this. So she ends up wriggling power back from the emperor and ruling again. He's not killed or anything, but he's limited. Okay. Now, why does she do this? Because she's interested in power. That's why. Once you have power, the saying goes that it's hard to give it back. So she's going to take and control and keep power. Now, let's go to 1900. There's something called the Boxer Rebellion. A lot of people in China are upset. They're upset with a lot of things that are happening, losing wars, but they're really upset with foreigners. And can you blame them? I mean, their country has been through opium wars, their ports are being taken over, foreigners can do things without being arrested. I mentioned that in a few lectures, a few classes ago, that there was these rules that were put in place where if you were a foreigner in a port city in China and you committed a crime, the Chinese government could not prosecute you. You could be prosecuted by your own government, but they couldn't do it. So people in China are upset with this. Like, how's that fair? You can commit a crime in my country and you're not going to get in trouble for it. So the Boxer Rebellion comes out of this. This is a frustration from the people. This society, it's a secret society called the Boxers, believe that their martial arts movements and their religious rituals can help them sort of defeat the foreigners, including fighting against guns with bullets. So the Boxer Rebellion erupts. A lot of foreigners are killed in 1900. And the missionaries, diplomats, journalists, anybody that was foreign was susceptible to being killed during the Boxer Rebellion. It gets pretty bad. Other countries have to send troops there, including America has to send troops to sort of quell or put down this rebellion. And it does get put down, but it's a big event, and it happens exactly in the year 1900. That's why it's easy to remember if you're a history buff like me. So again, 6 European nations plus the United States have to send forces, and Japan, to put the rebellion down. Now the Empress Dowager by 1900, she's getting pretty old. She sees a need to do some reforms. Now, she doesn't want to do a lot of reforms, but she's doing a little bit. But these reforms are way too late. So she should have changed earlier and did not. Now, in 1908, this is the part that is pretty interesting. The Empress Dowager dies. And the day before she dies, her nephew, who is the emperor, now an adult, been adult for a while, he dies. What we think happens, and I'm not just saying this is a conspiracy, historians say this, most historians agree this happened. So I'm not putting this out there to give you something that's not legitimate, that she poisoned her nephew before she died. She knew she was dying and was afraid that he would, do these reforms that she did not want, and he would undo the things that she wanted in China. So she ends up poisoning her nephew, who dies, and then she dies the very next day of extreme old age, leaving the empire with another child. I think his name was Pu Yi, and I think he was 8 years old, maybe 7, very young kid, as the next emperor. But he is not going to last long, and people call him not a real emperor, but he is quickly not in charge of China anymore. And there's a new government. There's a sort of a refreshing government. Dr. Sun Yat-sen is the person that's going to be the kind of the spiritual leader of this new sort of regime and government. There's a revolt that was attempted in the 1890s and doesn't work, and Sun Yat-sen has to live in exile. Sun is a really interesting guy. Grows up mostly in Hawaii. At the time, was not a state when he was growing up. It was part of the Kingdom of Hawaii. He's a medical doctor. He was also interested in government. He travels to the United States. He sees a lot of great things in the United States, a lot of ideas about democracy that he loves. He meets with a lot of people. Pretty well liked, Dr. Sun Yat-sen. And this is a picture of him here. He's influenced by Western ideas. He wants to establish a democracy, something completely new for China. And he's greeted as a hero when he returns. So after the fall of the Manchu dynasty, comes back. He's the first president of China. He wants to modernize China. But very quickly, things start to go a little bit awry. It's hard to modernize a country that's completely not modern overnight. Usually you have to do things slowly over time. He eventually gives power to a general. So Sun says, I'll give you power to be the next leader of the country because you are giving me your army and you are promising that you will, respect the democracy and you will rule justly. And this guy says, sure, I will. I absolutely will. And then, of course, he doesn't. So Sun, who now is upset with this new leader who's sort of taking over and making himself almost like a dictator, he's upset by this. He goes out and he tries to recruit help to maybe overthrow this person or get a new government in place. And Sun Yat-sen goes to 2 groups of people who will be at war with each other for a long time. He goes with the nationalists, or Kuomintang, and then he also meets with the communists, which is new at the time, communism. And he's sort of dealing with both groups, saying we have to get rid of this general who's leading the country and doing bad things. So both the communists and the nationalists, who we will find out in China, do not like each other. Both of them like him. So Sun is kind of one of those guys in Chinese history who is pretty well liked by everybody. Okay, I had to shorten this video so I could get all of these questions in by the 15-minute mark, which is as long as I can go. So sorry I had to cut off a little bit at the end of that. But the checkpoint has 3 questions today. First question, what resulted from the anger and frustration that the Chinese felt toward foreigners? That is an uprising called the Boxer Rebellion, which led to further occupation by Western powers. Question number 2, what happened to China after the Sino-Japanese War? It lost even more control to the powers, the imperial powers. And the last one, what caused the armed conflict between Great Britain and China in 1840? That, if you remember, is the Opium Wars, and they lost. So Britain refused to stop selling opium. That's the answer. Good.